Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kevin Semple, and I guide the development of Unity's Meta Quest support, Windows Mixed Reality support, and AR Foundation support as a product manager on the XR team. I still remember my first time putting on a VR headset. I was blown away at how easy it was to trick my brain into forgetting where I was, who I was with, and transporting me into a new world. I knew immediately that I wanted to see where this technology could go, and what a journey it's been. We're here today to talk about creating immersive games for the next platforms. And I'm joined by some wonderful folks from Resolution Games. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Thank you. So my name is Tommy Palm. I'm the founder and CEO of Resolution. I have a programming background originally, so I've been making games for quite some time, well before Resolution. I don't do any programming anymore, unfortunately, but I do some game design. I'm still really interested in product, and I've been a big fan of virtual reality as well ever since I tried it first time. I tried it in '92, back in the day on an arcade machine. I thought this is going to be it.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is David. I'm one of the developers on Demio. My background is VR and AR development. That's all that I've been doing so far. I absolutely love it. I'm very passionate about it. So it's super nice for me to work at Resolution Games and have this opportunity.
Hi, my name is Sebastian Bularca. I've been in the industry since like 2001, different roles. From journalist for many years and then moving towards producing project management. Then finally I learned programming and became a programmer. So right now I'm a core and tools developer for Resolution Games.
Thank you. Today we'll cover OpenXR, input, iteration. We'll talk about porting games from and to XR platforms. We'll talk about graphics, interactions, performance, and getting started. By the end of today, you will leave with some first-hand learnings that you can take to build immersive games for yourselves, and you'll leave with some great stories and anecdotes from Resolution Games. So let's kick things off. Tommy, can you tell us what types of games Resolution Games makes and what types of platforms you target?
All right, so we've been making quite a lot of games by now. I think we have 14 or somewhere around that thing in our portfolio. We've been around for 9 years, so we started trying to do much more accessible games. We figured a lot of people are going to be curious about the tech, and not everybody's going to want to have shooters. There's going to be plenty of people doing shooters. So let's do some of the other games. We started with fishing game, and since then we've gone over to more hardcore gaming actually, because the audience on these platforms are still a lot of like real gamers who think like this is going to be the next logical step for games. I can be inside of the game world, and they wanna play the really big immersive games here. So now we're doing Demio is we showed on stage here. It's one of our biggest games, and it's available for basically all the platforms on VR. So we have PlayStation VR, we have Meta Quest, which is the biggest platform for VR right now. And we also decided to make it for flat screen, actually, the Demio version, because we wanted, it's a multiplayer game, wanted to have as many people being able to play against each other as possible. And that's also why we target this so broadly.
Mm-hmm. And across all of these platforms, are players able to play against each other platform to platform through cross-play as well?
Yes, they are. And that's... It's as a player, that's what you kind of expect, right? That's what you want. But as a developer, it can be really, really tricky, especially like launching updates and things like this. I don't even know how many platforms Demio is available for right now, but it's
a lot of them.
Yeah. So every time we do an update, we have to do just a QA process of bug testing, making sure that they can play against judges. Mm-hmm. Quite a challenge.
Yes. With the number of platforms that exist today, we see the industry converging on OpenXR. OpenXR is an open standard created by the Kronos Group. Unity is a member of the Kronos Group, which means we make contributions and we strive to address feature gaps. Now, Unity offers an OpenXR plugin so developers can get started quickly. But I'm interested to know from you, what was it that made you consider OpenXR?
Well, both. I mean, one of the things that makes it was basically the lack of standardization. So we started looking into OpenXR in 2020 for one of our games, mostly because since we have a fairly large back catalog that we have to maintain, and my role as a tool developer is to make sure that we provide tools in order to make this process easy, we looked into generalizing a bit the solution, because having separate SDK for Oculus Meta and also for Valve and using OpenVR and providing input for each of the platforms and then just keeping track for all the updates and everything, that was really, really problematic. So OpenXR was kind of offering that solution. And we started with one of our first games implemented was Blaston. And what happened, it was that back then, OpenVR, at least not Valve, Valve had support for OpenXR, but Valve SDK, but not for the input. So we still implement it for Oculus, sort of like looking in the future a bit and trying to prepare ourselves for when that time is going to come, which fortunately did. And now we have so many platforms that are actually supporting OpenXR and makes it very, very easy for us to maintain this back catalog.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are some of your key learnings since adopting OpenXR?
Well, obviously start early to implement. The thing is, with starting early, it's always that you're going to encounter several challenges in order to do that. So it will definitely pay later on. So you're basically canceling, possibly, depending on the choice, a technical debt that you may encounter, especially if you're planning to maintain these games. If you have, I don't know, maybe a game that you're going to have DLCs or anything like that. So yeah, that was one of the main learnings.
Yeah, I also think that it's important to mention that if you support OpenXR from the beginning, then in the future, if some other headset comes up, it's nice that you know that Unity is on your side helping you out, porting it, more or less. So you kind of make it future-proof if you start using OpenXR from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Unity is all in on OpenXR. Now, I'm curious, what types of resources, tools did you use to learn OpenXR?
Well, when we started, we had obviously the OpenXR documentation. Now it's probably a good time to bring UnityXR, because UnityXR allowed us to do this a lot easier, since while it was still in the preview as a package, it did have enough documentation for us to make it usable. So it was UnityXR's documentation, OpenXR documentation, and when Oculus finally came with their own version of OpenXR, they had, I think it's called Oculus XR, yes? Then things got a lot easier because they actually provided us with a solid to-do list on how to implement it. So those were more or less the main tools. And the second was, I would say, experience, because having experience with multiple SDKs before, like the difference was not that significant, so we were able to adapt and deliver.
Mm-hmm. Now, what recommendations do you have for anyone in the audience here who might be considering starting a project on OpenXR?
Well, as a recommendation is use OpenXR. I mean, at this point, what happens is that OpenVR is basically deprecated, so there is not really an option. So, and OpenXR covers most of the platforms, so I think that's probably the best recommendation. Just look no further. I don't think there are actually any other sort of alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Let's switch gears now and talk about graphics. We saw on the keynote that there are some awesome changes and updates coming to the graphics in Unity 6. Today, Unity offers the Universal Render Pipeline, or URP for short. It allows you to ship some really customizable rendering to lots of different platforms out there. At Unity, we recommend URP for XR development, and if you load up the new templates that are available, you will see that they start you off with URP projects. I would like to know from you, what is your experience with the different render pipelines that Unity offers?
So I'm going to start just by putting up a certain disclaimer. I am not a shader programmer. I have some knowledge, obviously, but I haven't been doing that consistently. But we did work with URP quite a bit. And we actually started in the same game that I was talking before. It's called Blaston. We added URP when it was a preview package. So it was a bit of a leap of faith there because we didn't know what to expect and what's going to happen. And it proved itself to be a good idea. We did have quite a few challenges, if I remember well, doing that. Specifically, the fact that every time we were updating a major Unity version, there was a certain level of incompatibility with the shaders. Also, using shader graph, that was something, it was one of the main reasons why we moved on to using QRP, because we had access to shader graph, and we thought that's a good idea, and we still think that. But it was a bit of a curve learning and using it, of course. And also, there were some challenges related to that as well, being a preview package. And yeah, I mean, there was one thing that I remember, and that was foveated rendering for MetaQuest that was supported by URP, and it was really important. With a bit of a problem there. There was a bit of a bug for a while, which it was, if some of you maybe know, the bleed bug, where that foveated rendering was actually not activating on Quest. It got fixed eventually, so that's really good. Yeah.
Yep. I think that for talking a bit about foveated rendering, like URP helps us a lot. I don't know if you know, but it enables you to have like true foveated rendering on eye-tracked enabled devices. So for us on Demio, we're currently doing that conversion, mainly because of Spatial. We're going to have one of our colleagues do a talk about it in the afternoon, Pavel. So we can learn a bit more about there. But having URP helps us a lot with that. So for example, PlayStation VR 2, if you have URP, you can get straight out of the box, like true foveated rendering, which is fantastic for performance. Same thing for Quests and Quest 3. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's also, we found very useful the fact that you can have different assets with different settings, right? So you can actually load different assets for URP pipeline depending on what you need. So since we had like both Quest 1 and Quest 2, and as we added feature to the game, features, we started becoming a bit bloated, so we started having memory issues, we started having obviously more rendering issues and all that. And the game would not look and run great on both in the same dive. While Quest 2 was fine, Quest 1 was really struggling. So we came with the idea of basically just having different graphical settings, but not different assets, because we wanted to use the same APK. We didn't want a separate APK for Quest 1 and one for Quest 2. That would have been adding quite a bit of work, especially when it comes to maintaining the back catalog. And we used, for that, we used specifically addressables combined with URP assets, and we would load whatever settings we needed, and that really, really helped.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there were some trade-offs that you had to consider, but the benefits outweighed some of the negatives there.
Absolutely. I mean, it like everything. I think when you adopt a new technology of any sorts, like there will be some challenges in the beginning. You'll put more work in the beginning, but that experience will really pay off in the future if that feature specifically continues to be developed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just butt in here a little bit, like one of the big challenges for us is that the PlayStation VR 2, for instance, has a ton of performance. It's a cabled system, right? Whereas a lot of these other MetaQuest 2 and 3, there is battery powered. So the differences in performance between those different devices is going to be pretty massive. And we kind of want the game to look as similar as possible. So we need to be really good at making sure that we hit a good target where it looks good on both systems.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so URP is recommended for XR games, and when I think about what the future holds and where our investments are going at Unity, our investments are in URP. So if you are starting a new project today, I highly encourage you to check it out. All right. When I'm thinking of XR development, one of the most important things that someone has to consider is how their users will input, or what input modalities a user will use to engage with the game that they're playing. So let's talk input. How do you manage cross-platform input with the 14 plus platforms that you're targeting with your games?
Yeah, I've been thinking all this time. I've been thinking about what Tommy asked, like about our many platforms. So currently we support 10 platforms for Demio, and as of Q1 next year, we are expecting to support 11. And we support controllers, we support keyboard, we support all types of VR input, we support hand tracking, like we have some support for eye tracking. So it's
Touchscreen.
Touchscreen, yeah. It's like pen. There's a lot of inputs that we need to consider. So for us, a fantastic tool that we've been super happy to use is the new input system. The new input system allows us to have several control schemes. Allows us to have like buttons that change depending on the context. Unfortunately, on Demio, we started the project some time ago, and at that time we didn't have the new input system. So the VR part of Demio is still the legacy input system. The flat screen part of Demio, yeah, because Demio also has, you can play it either way you want to, in either VR or flat screen. So the flat screen part of Demio already supports the new input system, and we've been seeing like how easy and seamless it is for us to add. So recently we added touchscreen support. It's something we're working on, and it was super easy. As long as you have the foundation there with the new input system, it's super easy to add another control scheme, add another context. But then again, we're super happy that Unity still supports the legacy input system, because we need to run it with both things at the same time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this also comes into design quite a lot, that you have to decide early on in the project whether you're going to be like really leaning into the fact that you have hands, or if you want it to also work on a game controller with buttons and joysticks, right? So in the case of Demio, we designed it so that the actual core things that you do have very, very simple interaction. Basically, just select something and you put it somewhere. And that, so it translates well to all of these. In some other games that we have, Racket Club that's coming up soon, then it's all about natural motions and like really using your body the way you would when you play tennis or something like that. And that obviously translates horrible into touchscreen or anything else, right? So you have to kind of make that decision for your product. Is this a product that's going to go really cross all of these devices, or is it a product where you're really using, like, personally, hand tracking to me is one of the most exciting things about XR, because I always felt that gaming is held back by the controller, because it's so abstract. You see it if you give it to a kid. They have to learn interactions of like pressing this button is, greeting somebody, and pressing this button and throwing a hand grenade. So like you quick mix and you are now hated by that little NPC group. Whereas your hands, we've been training to use them a lot. So I think that makes it so much more intuitive. Chance for us to kind of open up gaming to much more people. Same with voice, really cool from the keynote. Being able to speak to your NPCs. I think a lot of us dreamt about that for a long time, and now we're slowly getting there. So very exciting. Input is a really cool topic.
Yeah, it sounds like there are some great improvements in using natural input methods to interact with games now. Now, input is closely tied to interactions, and you've already touched on interactions a bit, so let's dig deeper into those interaction methods. Unity has the XR Interaction Toolkit, which is a robust component-based system that allows you to build really cool interactions in AR, VR, and MR games. Can you talk about your experience with the Interaction Toolkit?
Well, it's a bit of a story here because, story time. What happens is, from my perspective at least, or from our perspective, we have three main ways of looking at a game when you develop in VR. One of them is you do whatever change you have, you put your headset, you test the changes, you go back into the editor, do the same thing. This is very cumbersome, obviously not very good. Second is to be able to simulate a VR environment on the desktop, so you use your mouse, use your keyboards, go around. And the third one, which I think I'm not sure how many actually implementing this, and we don't implement that in all of our projects, but we try to, is to literally have a flat screen mode for the game. That makes it a lot more easier in very, very different. So these are the three things. So for me, as a tool developer, I wanted to provide some sort of both input package, because we develop UPN packages, an input package that handles the input on all the platforms using OpenXR and then plugs this input automatically into a system that takes over and sort of generates this simulation and also allows you some additional tools to be able to do a desktop mode for the game. And we developed this for around, I think, a month and a half. It was going in a good place, but then somebody in the team showed me the fact that we have the XRI, which was in preview. I knew about it, and the first iteration that I've seen was not really doing what we needed. But later on, looking at the last iteration, just pre-release one, we realized that at least the two parts, the simulation part and the input part, they're already taken care of by the XRI. So we decided to just use it in all our projects. Once, because it's a tool that we don't have to spend money on and time on implementing, which is really good. And second is maintenance, right? So, and keeping it up to date, which is also a big deal. So yeah, that was the experience. And yes, there are some challenges. I think there are some improvements that we would like to do. For example, one of the requests that came from the team is to be able to configure this XRI interaction mode, because it feels that it's offering a bit more, too much, compared to how much you need, which is a good thing. It's just that it would be nice to be able to configure it and say, okay, I just want the input, or I just want that or the other, you know, and not necessarily have so much stuff when you drag and drop a prefab into the scene, and that sort of activates the whole simulation system. And that, hopefully, Unity will be able to provide that, which will be very nice. If not, obviously, you're going to have a package that's going to take care of that, so yeah.
Don't worry, I'm taking your feature requests very seriously. We hear you loud and clear. Now, Tommy, I know that business decisions can often influence how things change in a game. Can you talk about how business decisions influence interactions? Because I know many resolution games are very social.
Yeah, so if we take the example of Demio again, the base idea was to try to recreate this kind of magical social experience, like when you're playing a role-playing game with your friends, pen and paper thing. So that's how I got into programming originally, that I was playing, I felt the rules were pretty cumbersome, you need to learn, and I thought this computer would be great at simplifying this. So I always played a lot of role-playing games and never really had that deep social experience that I have. So I think we nailed that pretty well with Demio. So when we started developing Demio, we said, we want to bring the old group back together again, right? And still VR is not so big. We're still talking about maybe 10 million active devices out there today. So providing a flat screen experience would allow people to kind of bring their group back together. It has another really nice advantage, and that's that somebody who joined on flat screen could feel like, oh, I want to have hands too, and really feel the board. And we've seen a lot that in comments that people have actually bought a headset through that route. So it really makes you popular with the hardware manufacturers, because they're obviously looking to sell more stuff. So that's an example of how we're thinking. But then again, as I said, then you have to really decide. I think with Demio, we leaned more over into VR than we did on flat screen. And I think that the flat screen is a little bit less of a full game as the VR game is. So it's consequences of those decisions, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, like in VR, the social aspect of it, it's way bigger, because I can actually interact with you. Now with hand tracking, I can actually precisely gesticulate to tell you about something, which is, you can't really translate most of those things to flat screen.
No, and it's so cool, if you have an old friend, just by the animations of their head and their body movements, you can really see that that's your friend, right?
Yep.
And you tend to forget that you're maybe in different parts of the country or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, Sebastian, you were talking earlier about how XRI allows you to improve the simulation aspect and test games. Can we dig a little bit deeper and talk about what testing and iteration looks like at resolution games?
Well, We try as much as we can to do some sort of test-driven development. We are not always succeeding, but at least we try to use tests as much as possible. So I guess unit testing, it's one of those things that really helps. It also, since we have the case where basically each our application has the core, and then we have around 50 packages that comes like tools and all kind of things that it's just common code base that we try to reuse. So yeah, that's also a tool. We actually do that ourselves, yeah.
Yeah, also just to butt in a bit, but I think like in terms of iteration, it's a very, very important. You mentioned it a bit before, but it's very, very important for you to have like a proper simulator, because at least in terms of VR, like if it is cumbersome for you to test your game, because you always need to like constantly do that, and okay, the link cable is not working and all those things, you won't test it as much. So for us, having like a robust simulator where we can just like play with, like in 2 seconds, we can test our features, really helps us like test new features and faster. So it's like a really, like at least for me, that's a recommendation, is always have a robust simulator where you can test your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you say that your games are designed in a way where they can be played in a desktop mode, even though they're going to be a VR game, so that you can test them?
Yeah, you could. The experience maybe would not be the same or not the intended experience, but I think like many of our games, we have like a proper desktop experience for them, at least to test.
The thing is, obviously, not all of them are suitable. Like, we have a part that actually can work like that. Take Demio, which actually ended up on the flat screen, definitely. It works, okay, but having Blastone, where you have basically, it's all about the competition in a 3D environment, that would not have the same even close immersion, or it would just feel a bit weird to be able to have slow projectiles that go towards, keep waiting on a desktop, not the same thing. And it's because it's all about dodging, it's about moving, it's about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and most of our simulators look like this.
Yeah, yes.
Now, there's also a mixed reality mode in Demio. Can you talk a bit about how you tested to make sure that that worked well?
Yeah, for mixed reality in Demio, we adopted since like very early into it. But it was very important to us to have, like, again, a good simulator for your room environment. Because in the beginning we were having some issues with that, so every time we needed to test, like I want to put something on the wall, I would need to do a build, test it on the device, okay, it's not working, it's not on the wall, it's on the ceiling. And it took a lot of time to iterate. So again, recommendation, just we built a tool that we can actually simulate several types of environments, and then you can, in the editor, just like look at it without having to build it every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that saves you the time of having to put on the headset.
Build is like a long time, so yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, we test to improve performance, catch bugs. Can you talk about some of the big challenges you've solved through testing and iteration?
Well, I assume we're talking a bit about optimization here, more or less. I mean, optimization for VR, it's its own thing. Let's take, for example, something that we had experiment with, like culling, dynamic culling, which is different in VR. Obviously, you can't do the same thing like on a desktop. And it needs to be, given the environment also, the performance needs to be a lot better. One of the things that we found really, really good was switching for some of the projects to addressables, so trying to get as much control as possible over memory consumption, because our main problem generally with the devices is memory. Since we don't usually end up for very high-end looking games, but rather for the experience itself, that ends up in having a lot of things going on which actually take more memory rather than CPU cycles or like GPU cycles. So and addressables really helped with that. So we created tools to be able to do that, to load dynamically certain things, like take, for example, the UI elements. Not all the UI elements need to be on the scene in the same time, so we just load them dynamically depending on the situation. Yeah, I mentioned URP optimizations and loading assets dynamically depending on the device. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
But I also feel strongly that making games, it's so important to test what you have regularly. And I think classic is that we get very excited about something from an idea perspective. We have a whiteboard like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if? and then we go and implement that, and you test it, and it's like, it doesn't work the way you had imagined it. And instead of like, well, you kind of program it so it's more like we had, discussed, you kind of let the code lead you a little bit. And that's, I think, one of the really strengths with Unity is you can very quickly get something up and running and test it and see. And from there, it's so much easier to kind of take the next step.
100%.
Yeah. And also, one thing that's interesting is that we never compromise, or very rarely compromise, in most of our projects, on the end of the sprint functionality. So each sprint, at the end of the sprint, you need to have a playable game. That's uncompromisable. And that really, really helped us to maintain the sort of proper agile approach to development and be able to, most of the time, release on time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are some of the key takeaways, considering that you target so many platforms? What could folks learn from your experience?
Use OpenXR. What can I say? It's one of those things that is the first that comes into my mind. And giving the nature of the environment, addressables. It's probably, in my opinion, one of the most revolutionary packages that have been released by Unity, at least for us in our context, because it's what I would consider the first. I know there was an asset management system before, but it required a bit of an update, and I think Addressable is basically the first solid asset management system that Unity has. And there's a lot of push onto using it, I know, but it's still, I think, not used enough. I still think that the developer community does not quite understand how useful it can be. And I think that has to do a lot with the very steep learning curve. It's not an easy package to learn, but once you get there, like it's my experience same with the input system, right? Once you go and learn and take the time to do it, then you actually discover that there are really great features, which shout outs to the input system as well.
Yeah. I just wanted to reinforce exactly what you said, that sometimes we look at addressables or the new input system and we're like, it's not as easy to integrate as we were thinking. But the thing is, the learning curve, as soon as you spend some time learning it, then it becomes super easy afterwards. And it kind of makes your project more future-proof, which for us that we support so many platforms, it's something that helps us a lot, because we don't know, like, it's very different to develop a game for PlayStation 5 or to develop a game for Quest 1. And having the game ready with addressables and all of those things from the beginning, or the new input system, makes it so much easier in the future to actually port it to those things. So it's a really good recommendation if you're starting the game from the beginning to support those things.
Yeah.
I also think that it's very natural for us as developers. If you're an indie developer, you focus on making the game ready and then launching that, and then you're like, okay, other platforms you go on.
Yeah.
But from a business or marketing perspective, it's always better to launch like broadly on many platforms at once. So.
Another takeaway, I think it happens a bit too often, do not take your prototype code into the production. Because then you're going to end up just building around it, this weird thing, and you're going to have that problem constantly. And if you're going to end up in the situation you actually have to create DLCs and add more content and all that, you're never going to escape that curse of that prototype code that you have in there. And every time you're going to hate it, and yeah. So and it's still happening. I mean, I've seen it. In our case, not really, but I've seen it a lot, and yeah, it's not a good thing. It adds a technical depth that you cannot really imagine medium term. I'm not talking about long term. Yeah.
Now, we spoke a bit earlier about how you deploy to flat screen, you deploy to immersive platforms. I'm really curious how you think about going from flat screen to immersive or immersive to flat screen, since there's so many differences between the platforms there.
Yeah, I mean, it is not for every game, right, as I said before. So just you have to have a game that really fits that envelope. And in the VR space right now, there isn't so many games, like 400 or 500 games, whereas in Steam or something like that, it's millions. So it's very different competitive market as well. So if you need to compete on Steam, you need to start very early with marketing and hype building. That's not needed as much in the VR. So it's a pretty big commitment, and depends on if you're doing a title from scratch with new, very experimental mechanics. Might be better to try to launch it on something like App Lab first and see if you get the retention and traction you're looking for, and then kind of go broad. Because it's a very big bet, obviously, if you put all your development money in something and just hope that it's going to go well. In mobile, people do a lot of testing. That is much more difficult than this. You can't do like testing in a small region because there's so few players in those regions.
Well, thank you so much for all these great words of wisdom. If you're wondering how to get started with VR, with XR, we've got some new templates out. So I encourage you to download Unity 22 LTS, where you can check out an all-new mixed reality template that will get you started with the right packages, the right settings, configured for the devices you love. We've also got an updated VR template that, again, will get you started with the packages you need. Because I know half the time of getting started is just setting up your development environment. Now, there are some other talks going on today that you might be interested in, whether you want to learn about Spatial and Vision OS, whether you want to learn about what's coming up in the XR roadmap, or whether you want to learn about what Meta is doing. They've got a booth out on the show floor as well. We've got our XR roadmap updated on our website, and we want to hear from you. We want to know which features that you love, you want to see come up next. Our roadmap allows you to give us direct feedback, and we want to know what you're thinking. I want to thank our guests from Resolution Games. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you.